So, Excellencies, distinguished speakers and panelists, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, a very warm welcome to this virtual event on the first EU-Canada dialogue on hydrogen. This new webinar series supports the EU-Canada High-Level Energy Dialogue, which was already launched in 2007 and further reinforced in 2014. This webinar is organized by the PTX Hub in collaboration with IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, and thank you for supporting us. It is funded by SPIPA, the Strategic Partnership for the Implementation of the Paris Agreement. My name is Heino von Meyer. I am a senior advisor to the PTX Hub, and I have the honor to guide you through our rich agenda, trying to facilitate a lively exchange. We have an impressive lineup of speakers and panelists whom I will briefly introduce before their interventions. The focus of our dialogue is on the development of a global regulatory frameworks for hydrogen and its derivatives and how Canada and the European Union can support this. You all have seen the program with two panel sessions. The first will compare notes and take stock of the European and Canadian approaches to regulating hydrogen, developing standards and certification schemes. And the second session will then try to shed light on the international state of debate on hydrogen and its derivatives and what might be elements and viable routes towards achieving agreement on a regional or even global regulatory framework for hydrogen. Just a last housekeeping info, the session will be recorded and the raising hands and the chat function are disabled, yet I would encourage you to use the Q&A function to pose questions, and I cannot promise that we will be able to answer all of them, but we will try to do our best. May I now invite the representatives of the EU and Canada for their welcome address. We've just been informed that the Executive Director, Paula Vieira, is called to another meeting. So we will start with Tudor Constantinescu from the European Commission. He is, since more than a decade, principal advisor to the Director General for Energy in the European Commission, DG ENER, and he has a long career from which I'll pick only one information. He was president of the Romanian Agency for Energy Conservation, and as such also ensured the presidency of the Network of European Energy Agencies, ENR. And I will also introduce directly the second opening speaker from Canada, Dr. Aaron Hoskin. He is Senior Manager within the Fuel Diversification Division at Natural Resources Canada, responsible for both the federal, provincial, and the international activities. And that for more than 15 years now, he is leading and contributing to the development of various programs and policies, including the hydrogen strategy for Canada. And Aaron is also representing Canada in international fora such as the Clean Energy Ministerial. With this introduction, please, Tudor, if you would like to open the meeting with your welcome address.
Thank you, Heino. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure and an honor for me to open, co-open, if I can say so, this workshop today, and to see some of good colleagues from Canada. Europe and Canada clearly have very similar objectives in terms of climate for achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. So we try to improve and diversify energy supplies. We try to decarbonize the energy system, to promote innovation, to promote energy efficiency, and we cooperate in all these fields with Canada, as we do cooperate, and I'll refer to this briefly as well, on hydrogen, but is an area on which we think we can do definitely more. Let me set maybe the scene of our efforts aiming to regulate this emerging market for hydrogen. For amongst several short-term challenges we are facing, energy prices and COVID crisis and the Russian invasion now on Ukraine, all these have an impact, and we have to deal with this very special circumstance, which makes that EU needs actually to reduce fossil fuel consumptions, and this is one of the top priorities along the carbon neutrality and the sustainability of our economy. Now, you know that Europe, and this was one of the priorities, of the first priorities of the President von der Leyen, the European Green Deal, when we already launched the idea that Europe to be the first carbon neutral continent. And then she put us on track and asked to deliver more for 2030. And this was really very important, because it sets the whole process of investing more now in order to avoid stranded assets, lock-in effects in the energy system, and already to decarbonize by 55% to reduce greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2030. And this triggered a lot of action, including the energy system integration strategy, where we identified also the role of hydrogen in the energy transition and as a bridging element in making sure that we can decarbonize heavy-duty transport, carbon-intensive industries, being steel, being fertilizers, being refining. So, and we came with a hydrogen strategy in this respect. So it is critical. Therefore, we have been clear why it's critical to ensure, especially that the hard-to-abate sectors are decarbonized, and we have a really system which is overall decarbonized, not only the electrons but also the molecules part of it, and therefore the important role of hydrogen. As towards 2050, we see that half of our energy system will be based on electrons, but the other half will not be based on electrons. So we need to work on that. And for this, we set up in the strategy and investment agenda, first of all, but having clear goals and objectives, now the 40 gigawatts of renewable hydrogen electrolyzers by 2030. And with this triggering, as I said, an investment agenda, which supported also the efforts we have now after the COVID crisis of economic recovery. So basically in this field, we estimated that the investment of about 40 billion euros in electrolyzers will trigger more than 200-300 billion euros of investments in the additional 80 to 120 gigawatts of renewables which we'll need in Europe. But even then, I would like to say this is well, maybe not enough. And when we look now at the current circumstances, we see the need for an acceleration in this field very strong. The strategy was very important, as it was the energy system integration strategy, but then to put in place a lot of measures. And for this, we integrated the provisions on hydrogen in the Fit for 55 package. The Fit for 55, it was one of the most comprehensive legislative packages we launched last year in summer with about 13 legislative pieces to the Climate Social Fund, and in the autumn with the hydrogen and gas decarbonization package, which my colleague Johannes will refer a little bit later. The Fit for 55 already helps us to address also the issue of security of supply and of reducing gases. That's about 100 billion cubic meters of gas, which will not be needed by 2030. And in this respect, in a way, supporting the latest effort we have made in this area and the most ambitious plans which are linked to repower EU. This came in the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it's very much building up on an acceleration of the Green Deal. Yeah, so, but it's therefore very important, first of all, to diversify supply and bring in more renewable gases. and second, to accelerate our clean energy transition. When we speak about this, in short term, we need also to ensure that gas storage facilities are filled 80% this year, 90% and next year, and so on. And in what regards the first pillar of production import of renewable, hydrogen is one of the important dimensions. We speak here about the hydrogen accelerator. In the Renewables Directive, which we tabled last year, we spoke about the target of 50% for renewable hydrogen in industry and 2.6 in transport. This would accumulate it to about 5.6 million tons of renewable hydrogen produced. Now we want to double the production in the EU and to open the possibility for importing additional 10 million tons of renewable hydrogen by 2030. So this would be in total 20 million tons of renewable hydrogen. If you look at this from the perspective that now Europe is consuming about 9 million tons of hydrogen, which just a tiny fraction, I don't dare to say it is renewable hydrogen, and the global market is about 70 million tons of hydrogen. You see how we move really into a direction where hydrogen will play indeed an important role in the energy transition, and where we also need to cooperate and to develop the opportunities to bring the additional renewable hydrogen to Europe. For this, we speak about green hydrogen partnership, in particular with neighborhood countries and maybe in the Mediterranean region, but not only. And we speak about establishing a global European hydrogen facility to boost member states' access to affordable renewable hydrogen. For all this to materialize, it's clear that international cooperation, it will be, and it is essential. We are therefore very, very glad to launch these discussions with you also in the field of hydrogen today and to advance on this. We need a global framework for the hydrogen market. We need also to look at the supply of raw materials, to the standards, to the regulatory approaches, to the certification. And we are already working with Canada in this respect in the context of the International Partnership for Hydrogen Economy, but we also work with Canada in the Clean Energy Ministerial, and we support each other. And I think we can only benefit by contributing more to these activities, including the Global Ports Coalition we have launched, but also in our bilateral dialogue, and to see how to advance in this respect. And therefore, the seminar today and the following ones, I think, will pave the way for a successful cooperation, and happy to be again with you here today, and pass you back the floor to Aaron. I think from what I understood will take over. Thank you very much, Aaron.
Thank you very much for this very comprehensive overview on the situation from a European perspective, which is the perspective of an importing region. Over to Aaron Hoskin from Canada, maybe from a exporter perspective, but it is clear from this outset that the challenges are becoming even more urgent nowadays to diversify and to reduce the dependency on fossils. So Aaron, over to you.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. And thanks, Tudor, for that great introduction and overview. My opening remarks will be a little bit more brief, as I'll go into more detail in the next part of the session. I just wanted to welcome all of you here for this inaugural Canada-EU Dialogue on Hydrogen, and it's a key deliverable under the Canada-EU High-Level Energy Dialogue, as we heard earlier on. Today's focus is on supporting the development of a global regulatory framework for hydrogen and its derivatives, and that discussion is really timely, as Tudor just mentioned. While we're working to increase our exports of conventional fuels to meet the newly formed global energy security issues, we're also considering what other energy products and services can be expedited for export to Europe, including export of LNG, as well as the technologies that produce and use hydrogen and other clean fuels in the immediate term. In fact, Canada has world-leading hydrogen production companies and hydrogen fuel cell companies, and we are already exporting to Europe, to the European market. In fact, there's trains in Germany, there's trains in other jurisdictions, and there's hydrogen production equipment that's being used across Europe. And we're ready to increase those exports to help you meet your short and long-term energy needs as a key partner, as a sustainable, reliable, secure partner. And we really look to today's discussion to build on that partnership. We're also looking at how we can position Canada to become an exporter of clean hydrogen and other clean fuels in the next 3 to 5 years. Ensuring there's a global regulatory framework for hydrogen will be essential to unlocking this export potential. And in fact, the hydrogen strategy for Canada, and then concurrent to that or shortly thereafter, there was a report released by Adelphi that shows that Canada can provide between 25 and 35 megatons of clean hydrogen, electrolytic hydrogen, into the European market from the East Coast by 2050. There's sufficient renewable energy capacity in the eastern part of Canada to provide up, as I said, 25 to 35 megatons of clean, low carbon, zero carbon hydrogen. And Newfoundland, which is our furthest east province, has significant potential and capacity there, and they're already starting to establish those production facilities. Canada maintains that the evolving situation in the Ukraine illustrates the need to address both energy security and climate change. It's not an either or. Climate change doesn't sit back as we address the energy security issue. They both need to and must be addressed concurrently. It's imperative that we take immediate actions to contribute to the global energy security. We must concurrently continue to take actions to lower the emissions intensity of our energy products, whether those are conventional energy products or low carbon, clean hydrogen, and our economy, ensuring that we remain on the path to achieving our 2030 and 2050 climate objectives in Canada, in the European Union, and around the world. We also know that while today's conversation is focused on the Canadian-European market, we cannot do it alone. The discussion today is based on work that has been carried out through the International Partnership on the Hydrogen Fuel Cells in the Economy and the Clean Energy Ministerial Hydrogen Initiative, where Tudor and myself were co-founding members, and we co-chair that initiative with the Netherlands, the US, and Japan, with more than 26 other countries, many from Europe. I want to thank you all again for being here for this conversation. Paula Vieira, my executive director, sends her sincere apologies for not being able to make it. I will also have to drop off in the next half hour or shortly there before that, because there's an urgent cabinet meeting that I have to attend. But with that, I will pass the mic over back to the moderator. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron. And realizing that you are pressed in time, I will suggest that we change the order of the first panel session so that you could speak immediately, or otherwise your colleague who is waiting. But I would still want to invite Laurent Anthony to give his overview keynote before we dive deeper into the EU-Canada context. And Laurent Anthony is Public Affairs Manager for Hydrogen Technologies at CEA Liten, which is a major French research and development institute focusing on energy transition. And he is also a French representative at IPHE, which has already been mentioned by both Tudor and Aaron. And there he was heading the task force on hydrogen production analysis. But now we would first want Laurent to address the more global picture of what's going on the global scale with regard to hydrogen classification and certification efforts. Laurent, over to you.
Thank you very much, Heino, for your kind introduction. I will just share some slides. I hope now you can see them. So yes, just to set a little the scene, yes, as you have just mentioned, towards the global framework for hydrogen. Yes, I think, and that's, we all know that today there is a real global momentum. And even I would say we are trying to shift from momentum to actions. And many countries over the world have now their own hydrogen strategy already published or under finalization. And as you mentioned, clean hydrogen is a key challenge. And you were mentioning about IPHE. Today, IPHE is 21 members states plus the European Commission. And as you can see here, the budget devoted to hydrogen is only increasing every semester. So we meet twice a year, and what you can see from one year to the next, the hydrogen budget now is more than $30 billion devoted to develop the hydrogen funding. And this is increasing almost 10% per year or even more. And as also what we can see now, it's also becoming very common to install trade corridors. And this has just been mentioned between importers, exporters. Now also we have to put in place not only production capacities or consumption capacities, but also in order to facilitate trades and in order to ensure that hydrogen can become a commodity as many other goods. And yes, the other side. There are key drivers to develop this hydrogen domain. And I think it's quite important to ensure, and it has been a little mentioned by Aaron just before, there are different key drivers, but these key drivers will depend on unique national circumstances. So there is no unique solution that we can maybe applied everywhere and by each of the countries. No, we have to take into account the different national circumstances. And regarding the key drivers, of course, the environmental benefits, climate changes, but the targets may be more or less depending on the country, quicker or faster or not so fast, and more focusing on climate change, on local air quality or noise pollution. But of course, energy security, and this is in particular now today's, in particular in Europe, regarding the Ukrainian situation, where we need also to ensure our energy security, and means also energy system resiliency and stability. And this is quite key, and we need to speed up. And another point, also, we are more or less interested in developing the hydrogen economy, depending on your economic growth, which means that depending also on your technology level, if you have or not already the hydrogen technologies available, or if you invest in quite a lot of new innovations in the different hydrogen topics on the whole value chain. And one topic which becomes more and more important as more the technology becomes mature, it's good to have goods, to have equipments, but we also need skilled jobs, skilled manpower. And this means that we really have also to focus today, that's a key challenge, in order to ensure that all the industry, all the users will rely on the real and the adapted manpower they need. So do you see several key drivers? But this means also there are several key challenges in order to get there. And I would say in general, what we say, we need really to know to go at global scale, not only at scale for the industry, but at a global scale. And here I may mention three main key challenges, just mentioned before: innovation. As we mentioned, we all want to make hydrogen contributing significantly our climate targets and air pollution targets. But this means that we also need to ensure that we are able to produce low carbon hydrogen at competitive costs. And this requires innovation and upscaling of production capacities and transport capacities. And then the second key challenge, and this is exactly the topic we are discussing today, relates to policy and regulations. And we just had the steering committee of IPHE the 2 days before, and we were just discussing with one main investor. And we asked him, what is for you? What do you need? What would you like to have regarding governments? He said, I have one word: planification. And planification mainly of regulations. And these investors need to see a stable, strong policy signals, but stable, and that's very important. And that means also regulatory certainty. Not that we change in 2 years and 5 years. No, we are to invest for long-term equipments. And so that means that we need also long-term regulatory framework. And we also need to ensure a market transparency. And this is quite important, and we will discuss that also in the different roundtables. If we want consumers, society, to really believe that hydrogen contributes to all these climate targets, we need to ensure that the hydrogen they are now using is really clean, which means it really has the lowest carbon footprint as mentioned and as claimed. And that's why all these regulation standards become very important. And finally, of course, if you want to produce and to use, you also need to develop all the infrastructure investments regarding production, transmission, transport, and usages. And there are many international initiatives, as already mentioned, some by Aaron, the Clean Energy Ministerial, the International Partnership for IPHE and Fuel Savings Economy, IPHE, but you have also this Hydrogen Energy Ministerial, you have on the industry side, the Hydrogen Council, then on more technical side, you have some IEA technology collaborative programs, and you see there are quite a lot, but some of them are more focused on policy and market focus, whereas others are more focused on technology. And also some of them are only considering renewable hydrogen, whereas other initiatives are considering any kind of hydrogen, I would say regardless the primary energy used to produce this hydrogen. And now the idea is, it's very interesting to see that so many initiatives are ongoing at the international level, but this means also that now we need to coordinate all these initiatives. And this means that we have a international collaboration among all these initiatives in order to have the same view and the same position regarding regulations, codes, and standards. And just focusing on IPHE. So as mentioned, IPHE is, I would say, historically the first international initiative dealing only with hydrogen. And it has been established in 2003, so almost 20 years ago. It is currently chaired by the Netherlands. And here you see the vice chairs, US and Japan. And of course, as member of these 21 countries, and we have the European Commission and Canada. And Canada is a former chair of IPHE. And the idea, and I would say the priorities of this initiative is really at the government level to share information on what's going on in each of the countries, in particular latest development, but also inform on future government policies and in order to foster also collaboration. And this is quite important, as mentioned previously. If we want to establish a global regulatory framework, we need to discuss together and to see what are these unique national circumstances in order to find the best consensus, which may be then applicable for all the countries interested in hydrogen. And just as example, and I will finish, regarding regulations, there is a specific working group on regulation, code and standard and safety. And for instance, you see that we have provided an RCS safety compendium with a heat map, just telling where are regulations missing and where should we put a focus on at a different international level. The hydrogen, the specific task force on hydrogen production analysis, and I think we will we have some discussion at the second roundtable more into details in order to find a common approach to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions when producing hydrogen. Another one, if we want to have also an international trade, here also then we try to identify some tariff and non-tariff barriers on imports and exports on hydrogen. All these reports are available. So just to summarize, in order to support this global hydrogen market, three main actions, we would say innovation, policy and regulation, and infrastructure investment. And I think now this workshop and this discussion between European Union and Canada will contribute to bring some concrete solutions. Thank you very much, Heiner.
Well, thank you very much, Laurent. This overview clearly shows the complexity, and in order to create regulatory certainty, it also needs cooperation and boiling down this into manageable schemes. I don't know, Aaron, would you still have time to give your impulse now? Then I would suggest that you go first, and I ask Johannes to wait for the second slot.
Yes, thank you so much, and thanks, Laurent. That was an unbelievable overview. Hopefully, and I appreciate the fact that we're being flexible on this. So I'll start kind of where I ended, and I'll probably repeat myself a little bit in terms of what was mentioned in the opening comments. But I do want to emphasize that today's discussion needs to focus on how Canada and the EU can collaborate to move forward on sustainable supply chains. As I said in the opening remarks, there's a new sense of urgency on establishing the supply chains given the renewed focus on energy security. But it's also essential to ensure that as these supply chains are established, they're done so in a secure and sustainable manner through well-established regulatory frameworks. And collaboration is essential. That's why today's discussion is essential to moving forward, both between Canada and the European Union, but also as a global market. Because, and I'll end with the same point, we need to avoid a patchwork of regulations between different jurisdictions, because that really causes uncertainty with investors, and it can be a significant limiting factor. We know that governments alone can't do it. The private sector needs to move forward as well. And the more we can work together to align our regulations, codes, and standards around hydrogen and trade of hydrogen, global supply chains, the better it is for everyone, for governments, for industry, even for non-government organizations. The strategy, the hydrogen strategy for Canada, identifies the need for strategic partnerships, international collaboration, and robust regulations as 3 of the 8 key pillars of implementation. And that's why today's discussion is so essential. We have a long-standing collaboration with the European Union on global trade, hydrogen, safety codes and standards. In fact, 20 years ago, I was in Italy talking about safety codes and standards for hydrogen, and there's a ton of world-leading work that the European Union and member states have done on hydrogen safety codes and standards. And then the regulations around those. In Canada, actually worked very closely with European Union members to develop the world's first hydrogen installation code more than 10 years ago, and that was emulated in markets around the world. So as you're building a new hydrogen refueling station, ensuring that there's a harmonized approach to that new build. The Canada-EU high-level energy dialogue is critical to formalizing the ongoing collaboration between Canada and the European Union. But Canada and the European Union also work closely, as we've mentioned a few times now, through the IPHE and the Clean Energy Ministerials. One of the first key actions on the work plan was to collaborate with the IPHE, building on the work that Laurent just spoke about, and focusing on a common methodology to determine the carbon intensity of all pathways for hydrogen. The Ports Initiative that Tudor mentioned also is a key deliverable under the Clean Energy Ministerial, and that was launched last year. And it's essential to advancing regulations for hydrogen and global trade, because ports are that conduit. They're that gateway for global trade. So if you're refueling in a port with hydrogen or its derivatives, there needs to be a safe, secure regulatory framework around what happens in the port, but also what happens when those ships leave the harbors and go across jurisdictions to export that clean hydrogen. The new Fit for 50 work that Tudor mentioned lays a strong foundation for this collaboration to grow and provides guidance on what regulations are needed. Domestically in Canada, we have several existing and forthcoming regulations that will drive down the carbon intensity of Canada's fuel mix, including hydrogen. The Clean Fuel Regulation is focused on Canada's liquid fuel mix for transportation, but it includes hydrogen as one of the credit-generating opportunities. There's forthcoming methane regulations, which will address emissions from the upstream extraction of methane, which will lower the life cycle carbon intensity from natural gas-derived hydrogen. And we're supporting carbon capture utilization and storage. In fact, Canada has world-leading carbon capture utilization and storage technologies and geological formations that and there will be significant advancements in natural gas reforming to the point that we have projects being built in Canada today that are capable of producing hydrogen from natural gas with 95% emissions reductions. And that's why Canada is focused not on all pathways to clean hydrogen. Yes, we have vast opportunities for electrolytic hydrogen using our vast untapped natural resources, our significant wind capacity, solar capacity, wave and ocean capacity as well. All pathways to clean hydrogen are part of the story, except grey, obviously. Provided that the carbon intensity of that hydrogen is low and it's driven to zero over time. And the only way to ensure that it's driven to zero over time is through a common methodology to determine what that carbon intensity is, and then by setting standards that on that carbon intensity that set a minimum threshold, and that that threshold gets more and more stringent over time, ensuring that hydrogen production and use remains a key path on our path to net zero and our 2030 climate objectives. So now back to the beginning of today's discussion. What I want to reiterate is what I said at the beginning. While we collaborate between Canada and the EU, building on this partnership, building on the long-standing work that both countries have done and will continue to do within the private sector as well as with governments, we must ensure that we do not develop regulations that could indirectly exclude other jurisdictions. The global hydrogen market cannot survive with a patchwork of misaligned regulations or codes and standards. It causes investor uncertainty, and it also causes issues between governments. And we need to work collaboratively to push forward, all in the same pathway to net zero, cementing hydrogen's role in our global net zero economy, and we need to do so now. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for taking the time before rushing off. I understand that your colleague will maybe stay with us for the discussion, but we have dived straight into the first session focusing on hydrogen standards and certification schemes under development in the EU and Canada, and it was useful that you described the process that has already been going on in the past. I would now like to ask Johannes Bauer from the EU Commission to provide the EU perspective. Johannes is project leader in the new unit Decarbonization and Sustainability of Energy Sources in DG ENER. He is in particular in charge of the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive, RED, adopted in 2018, and I guess also in the Delegated Act, which we expect to come out in a few days. Interestingly, in our discussion and context, maybe to know that Johannes was from 2016 to 2020 also at the EU delegation in Ukraine, supporting the energy reforms there, and before also dealt with EU-Russian energy relations. But today our focus is on the hydrogen debate. And Johannes, maybe if you could provide your perspective to introduce our panel discussion.
Thank you very much, and very pleased to speak at this event and to discuss a little bit our cooperation. My presentation will focus on the legislative and regulatory framework we are having on renewable and low carbon hydrogen, and which we are currently developing. And I will focus on the two most important legal acts which are relevant in that perspective, which is the Renewable Energy Directive and its amendment, which has been proposed under this Fit for 55 package, as mentioned by Tudor, and secondly also on the gas and hydrogen decarbonization proposal, which is relevant for hydrogen infrastructure, and proposing the regulatory framework in the EU for hydrogen for the future hydrogen infrastructure. So indeed, in the EU, yes, we have since 2018 the Renewables Energy Directive, which sets the framework for also for the certification of what we call renewable fuels of non-biological origin, and this is focused on the transport sector, and this concerns hydrogen-based fuels and also has the necessary provisions on the certification for such fuels, and I will come back to that. In the amendment now, which we have proposed and which is currently discussed with member states, EU member states and the Council, and in the European Parliament, we go much beyond, because for the first time now we set specific targets or fuel supply obligations for renewable hydrogen. And our support measures are limited to renewable hydrogen. I think that is quite important to underline. And this concerns two sectors. First of all, the industry sector, where we have proposed that in 2030, 50% of the European hydrogen consumption should be renewable hydrogen. And secondly, in the transport sector, where we have set a target of 2.6% of the energy consumption in transport, which should be based on renewable hydrogen fuels. There's also then in a separate proposal, in fact, a specific target for aviation, also for energy consumption in aviation, because we think that hydrogen should go in particular in these hard to decarbonize sectors, which is industry, transport, and there in particular maritime and aviation. The second proposal indeed is the one which wants to enable and regulate, give regulatory stability as early as possible for the developing hydrogen market in the European Union, and in particular to the infrastructure elements. This proposal also includes the future certification system for low carbon hydrogen, and it sets up a number of rules for the networks and for storage, including which are based and coming from the European rules of on the gas market. So hydrogen network operators will have to be independent, will have to allow third-party access. We also would like to propose the European network of system operators for hydrogen, similar to the network for gas transmission system operators, which is already working, in order to support an integrated network planning between the member states and for the European Union as a whole. And the proposal also includes some rules on hydrogen blending in existing networks, so gas pipelines, gas networks. And in fact, it proposes a 5% blending cap for cross-border points in the European infrastructure. This means this is not binding in the sense that there has to be a 5% hydrogen mix in the gas network, but that it means that on the cross-border points, the neighboring transmission system operator has to accept up to 5% hydrogen blending in the network. In addition, there are a number of other rules proposed. As I said, for these proposals, these are currently discussed in the co-legislators in the European Union. And we hope that we will have them finally adopted in early 2023, and it will then be implemented by member states. Now coming to the rules for certification, which are largely based for renewable hydrogen, as I said, on the Renewable Energy Directive. So there, the certification, in fact, will be done similar to the certification which is already practiced in the European Union for biofuels. That means through voluntary schemes, which also may apply for recognition by the European Commission. And these we already have developed a number of rules for these voluntary schemes, how they should work, and how also the cooperation with member states is being done. And the main principles there are the reliability, of course, of the data, the transparency, and the principle of independent auditing, which is necessary in order to certify renewable hydrogen. After an EU recognition, voluntary schemes will be able to operate in all EU member states, and this recognition is valid for the EU internal market. And so far we have already approved and recognized 13 voluntary schemes, and further will follow. And in the future, they will also be able then to certify renewable hydrogen. Well, our regulatory framework for such a certification is also, as mentioned, well, still in the development, and there are in particular two delegated acts, as we call them, so implementing legislation, which are forthcoming and which are important. One is one implementing legislation detailing the methodology for the greenhouse gas emission savings, which have to be achieved in order to be recognized as renewable hydrogen. This is the threshold is 70% compared reduction compared to a fossil fuel comparator. And this methodology will be is currently in the final stage of internal approval and will be published then hopefully in a few weeks. The same is valid for another implementing act on the additionality. And that means that we require in the Renewables Energy Directive that renewable hydrogen has to be produced by additional renewable energy capacity in the EU, but also in third countries if it is imported. And there are specific rules what that exactly means, and these rules also will be published also for the consultation of stakeholders in a few weeks, and after that that consultation, and then have to be adopted finally by the European Commission. On the greenhouse gas emission savings methodology, a similar act will also be adopted for low carbon hydrogen, but that will be at a later stage, and can be done only once the hydrogen primary legislation is enacted and is adopted. Maybe a few words on the international cooperation, and
please, we need to.
Yeah.
Please make it short.
Okay, very short. In principle, of course, for our for imported hydrogen and for domestically produced, the same rules apply. Of course, we would like to strengthen and to promote very much hydrogen production in the EU, but especially in the new situation following the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and this Repower EU communication mentioned by Tudor, we also put a focus on imports, and therefore cooperation with a number of partners and with Canada will be very important, because we have quite ambitious aspirational targets for these imports until 2030. So that's from my part. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johannes, for this overview. And it's becoming clear that our 2 hours are definitely not sufficient to discuss all the various aspects. But thank you for outlining all those details. And I would now like to invite Jens Honnen, who works as a consultant on energy policy at the Berlin-based think tank Adelphi, where he supports the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action in its energy partnership with Canada. And Aaron already mentioned one of the recent Adelphi studies. So Jens, you have looked into the hydrogen situation in Canada. And from the rich information you gathered, maybe if you could start pinpointing a few topics that might be of relevance for a discussion, which I'm afraid is going on in the Q&A section, but we will probably not be able to pick up all those elements there. But Jens, maybe you try to at least structure a bit of what we've heard.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks also for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. So in the energy partnership with Canada that you mentioned, Heino, part of our work aims at establishing a green hydrogen supply chain from Canada to Europe. And of course, in this context, the discussion we're having today is quite timely and relevant, and especially for the Canadian companies that we are in touch with that are looking at green hydrogen export projects and need clarity on regulation. So as we heard today from the representatives of the Commission and NRCan, work is well underway on the establishment of regulatory frameworks with standards and criteria for hydrogen. And the EU Commission has put forward first definitions for renewable and low carbon hydrogen in its gas package, with thresholds and methodologies to be detailed in delegated acts. And many of us are eagerly waiting on the delegated act to Article 27, which will define the criteria for hydrogen to be considered as renewable. And as we know, there have been lively discussions on this act, with some wanting stricter criteria, fearing that the EU's future hydrogen production will take away the renewable electricity needed for direct use, and others are worried that the standards set too strict could scare off investors and hamper the market ramp up. In the end, the Commission has the challenging job of striking a balance between both these legitimate concerns. In Canada, work on hydrogen regulation is well underway in the working groups tasked with the implementation of the hydrogen strategy. And given the Canadian context, I think we are unlikely to see a similar distinction between green and blue hydrogen as in the EU, and rather focus on emission intensity. And from a Canadian perspective, this makes sense, given the very different resource endowments and economic interests of its various provinces. We have the fossil fuels producing provinces looking at blue hydrogen, the eastern provinces with a largely renewable power mix interested in green, and provinces such as Ontario with high shares of nuclear, even at pink. But in the end, a coordinated approach for standard setting and certification will be key to create clear and transparent conditions for international hydrogen uptake. And this means, on the one hand, ensuring that the future hydrogen economy contributes to climate mitigation and the sustainability targets. And naturally, regulation will need to closely look at value chain GHG emission intensity of renewable and fossil-based hydrogen. And for the latter, this needs to include upstream emissions, such as from methane leakages. But in order to comply with the SDG goals, other sustainability aspects, including water consumption and pollution, biodiversity impacts, air and soil quality, land use, and also social and economic sustainability aspects will need to be considered too. The invasion of Ukraine further shows us that geopolitical considerations should be given higher priority in energy sourcing as well. And importantly, the regulatory environment should also promote the ramp up of the hydrogen market, both at home and abroad, enabling international trade and ensuring future energy security, especially in Europe. That is why there's a good case for an initial phase-in of criteria, starting off with less strict standards in order to lower costs for first movers and help with uptake. That's because in the beginning, we do not want to provide fossil fuels with a competitive advantage over hydrogen due to overly high standards for the latter. For the Canadian context, there's a concrete example. With its renewable energy potential, its relatively short shipping distance to Europe, and being a stable democratic partner, Canada could be a promising green hydrogen supplier to Europe. And in many places, existing hydropower capacities offer a renewable and cheap source of electricity. In Eastern Canada, hydro improves the economics for green hydrogen by offering a steady base load to allow electrolyzers to continue running at high capacity when the wind does not blow. Under strict requirement for additionality, however, the EU risks alienating investors and project developers in Canada looking to develop hydroelectricity-based green hydrogen projects for export to Europe. And with a compromised business case for green hydrogen in Canada, investors could be forced towards other markets, such as the US and Asia, and fossil-based hydrogen would be given an advantage over green. For the EU, which will require large-scale hydrogen imports in the future, this could constrain future supply with hydrogen imports. So examples such as these show that there's much to discuss on the establishment and coordination of a regulatory framework for hydrogen that sets the right incentives for investors and producers internationally, supports our climate and sustainability targets, and ensures security of energy supply. Today's dialogue is a great starting point, and I think there's much potential for the EU and Canada to continue working together on this undertaking. I want to thank you again for the invitation and opportunity to speak, and look forward to the discussion today.
Well, thank you very much, Jens. You've collected and structured a bit the various aspects. We have exactly 3 minutes left, and that's happening, unfortunately, very often in our online sessions now. But I would at least want to give both Johannes and, instead of Aaron, I think it's now Amandeep Garcha, is that right? Yeah, I would like to give you the opportunity to maybe answer one or two issues which have come up in the Q&A part. One is very much focusing again on the color coding issues. So there is a question, and Jens has already mentioned, in Canada, what we call blue, green, and pink are considered as clean hydrogen. And is that also the line taken in Europe? And what would be the distinctions? Would that then be low carbon hydrogen, Johannes? And maybe one element in the European debate that is very often controversial is how to deal with additionality. There are good reasons for additionality. However, in Eastern Canada, the hydrogen production would be based on existing hydropower because there is excess capacity. So how would you deal with additionality then? Would those capacities be excluded because not being additional? And Amandeep, from the discussions and the issues raised by Jens, is there anything you would like to react to? Maybe Johannes, if you start, and only with a very brief statement, please.
Okay, I will briefly start with the color code. So we in the EU or in the Commission, we don't use them. Indeed, we distinguish between renewable hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen, and other hydrogen. We will only have rules for renewable hydrogen, or have them already, and for low carbon hydrogen. We will have only targets for renewable hydrogen. specific targets, and we will have certification for renewable hydrogen and low carbon hydrogen still to be finalized and to be developed. So that on the first question, the second issue, this additionality, yeah, indeed, there's a lot of discussion about it. Of course, this is mainly coming from the EU context, where we have energy shortage, in particular now, and we need to transform our energy sector. We need to green our energy sector by, in particular, also adding additional deployment of renewable energies. Since hydrogen production is very energy intensive, we have therefore to ensure, and this is already laid down in the existing directive, you have to ensure that this is hydrogen production does not come at the expense of the overall need to deploy renewable energy in the European Union. Therefore, we have this requirement for additionality, and I think it makes also very much sense in order not to set wrong incentives. Obviously, I mean, everyone can import renewable hydrogen. That is also not certified, which means only that it cannot be accounted according to the renewable targets that member states have. But indeed, we will consider, as you mentioned, the need for a specific ramp up phase also. This we have already in the infrastructure package, where we have different phases for our regulatory rules. And we will also consider that for the additionality, because indeed we do not want to strangle a market which does not really exist yet and which has to be developed.
Thank you. Amandeep, in the questions and answers part, there are two issues maybe I could specify a bit more. The difficulty, how you balance the federal and the provincial perspectives, which of course on such a topic are difficult to balance. And one question hinted to the recent IPCC report, which had doubts that the Canadian hydrogen strategy was overestimating the potential for greenhouse gas reductions. Are you familiar with that debate, and could you give an answer what your impressions are at
Yeah, happy to do so, Heino. Thank you for the invitation, and very pleased to be here today. So the report that recently came out from the ICCC was, concluded that ECCC and NRCan took different approaches to estimating GHG emissions reductions from hydrogen. And so it's important to note that the approaches taken by each department were chosen to align with the specific purposes for which the modeling was undertaken. And the hydrogen strategy for Canada is essentially a call to action. And through our federal, provincial, territorial working group, and we have 16 different working groups under our implementation, there is complete alignment with the provinces that have released their respective hydrogen strategies. And they are in line with the call to action. Ultimately, the operationalization of the hydrogen industry will take place with the provinces and respective territories. Speaking on that, so as the hydrogen strategy's call to action is intended to show the full economic, environmental, and social potential that hydrogen can have if significant actions are taken by governments across all levels, as well as private sector in the country. Now, the strategy's findings show that there is great potential in all three areas, mirroring findings of other strategies domestically, as well as those released by governments all around the world. Now, when taking into account the hydrogen's full potential to drive down emissions across multiple sectors in the economy, transport, industry, oil and gas, clean fuels, the built environment, the hydrogen strategy identifies 22 to 45 megatons of productions by 2030. For the strengthened climate plan produced by ECCC model, they modeled one hydrogen measure, which is just blending as part of the 64 diverse measures with a sole focus on being on emissions reductions. So you can imagine while the focus and the scope was very different between the two reports, the intention of the hydrogen strategy is to be ambitious and to show a call for action across various sectors and not simply in hydrogen blending. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we should move on to our next session, and maybe in the final discussion round, we could bring you in again, but we have already now touched from time to time on the international dimension. So I think it is the right moment to move on to the second part. So thank you very much for your inputs, and maybe at the end we can bring you in again into a discussion. So the second panel discussion will focus on the road to a global framework for hydrogen, and what the state of debate is and how agreements can be developed. And I would like to introduce the participants of our panel, and fortunately also our gender balance will gradually improve. And I would like to start introducing Barbara Yings, the Program Manager, Green Gas Delivery and Use from the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. Could the colleagues maybe manage to get Barbara on screen? I don't have her yet. There Barbara is. And
I am here.
I would also like to introduce the other panelists. So maybe we could have the full picture. Barbara, by the way, many thanks for facilitating the technical upsetting of this webinar. She has over 35 years in the gas industry, starting, actually, I was surprised, as an offshore engineer and working up to international corporate roles. And she now works in IRENA and is deeply involved in the discussions on standards and certification. I would also like to introduce Mayra Kusch. Mayra is head of the Berlin office of the World Energy Council, the Weltenergierat Deutschland, together with the German energy agency DENA. The World Energy Council Germany has recently published a study on global harmonization of hydrogen certification. And before joining the World Energy Council network, Mayra worked as a senior consultant for energy, environment, and mobility at EPA, and also as an advisor to a member of the European Parliament. And the next panelist from the IEA, the International Energy Agency, is Dr. Uwe Remmer. He is head of Hydrogen and Alternative Fuels Unit, where he leads also the energy supply analysis and modeling within the Energy Technology Perspectives project. So he has a long experience as an energy modeler at the IEA and contributed as lead author to many IEA publications. And finally, again, Laurent Anthony from CEA Liten in Grenoble, this time maybe putting on his hat as leader of the task force at the IPHE. So I would suggest that Uwe Remmer starts off. Is that okay, Barbara? Then
yep, absolutely.
It's your turn.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon and good morning to everyone. Let me just try to share my screen. Yeah, what I want to talk to, what I want to maybe highlight to start with is that standards for defining hydrogen will be essential to the development of international hydrogen markets, like it was stressed already by previous speakers earlier today. And to illustrate the role of trade, I just want to show you some results from our scenario analysis. So what you see is results from our announced pledges scenario, which takes into account all the pledges countries made for reaching net zero. And we assume here that these pledges are fully implemented and reached on time. And hydrogen, of course, plays an important role in reaching net zero emissions, particularly if we talk about hard-to-abate sectors like parts of industry, heavy industries, parts of long-distance transport, aviation, and shipping. And overall, we see in this scenario global hydrogen demand reaching 250 megatons in 2050. And from this demand, around 20% are being traded in the form of hydrogen, so in the form of H2 liquid hydrogen, in the form of synthetic hydrocarbon fuels like synthetic kerosene, or in the form of ammonia. And you see in the left figure that the share of the different shares of these fuels being traded, so in the form of around 10% of the direct demand of hydrogen in the form of H2 are being traded. We see much higher shares for synthetic kerosene and ammonia. That's particularly due to the, of course, to the lower transport costs of these already processed hydrogen-based fuels. And if you look at the right side, we see also that some regions or countries have managed to cover their growth largely on domestic production of hydrogen. So we see here China, United States. Other regions will have to depend on imports to decarbonize the energy system. So that we talk about Japan, Korea, also parts of Europe and other regions like the Middle East, Australia, Northern Africa, Chile, but also Canada can export hydrogen, take advantage of their excellent renewable resources, or also access to low carbon natural gas, low cost natural gas, and also access to CO2 storage. So overall, trade will be an important part to reach our net zero goals, and standard certification schemes will be important to enable trade. And particularly also these standard certification schemes will be important also to provide investment security in the hydrogen supply chain, recognizing also that hydrogen is still a kind of nascent and dynamically emerging energy supply chain. So that particularly will be important to provide security to investments, to attract then investments in hydrogen production and also hydrogen transport. Coming more to some of the aspects that could be relevant for the development of a global or harmonized framework for hydrogen. Of course, there are already certification schemes and standards have been announced or in development. More recently this month, we saw that the UK announced or presented their low carbon hydrogen standard. And different schemes have been already existing. And of course, what of attention in these schemes today is on the kind of what's really the kind of threshold or actually quantification of the carbon intensity of hydrogen. So what does it really mean if we talk about these labels like renewable low carbon hydrogen, if we talk about the color scheme, so what does it really mean? So in that sense, the context is really important to really quantify, let's say, what is the greenhouse gas emission footprint of a certain type of hydrogen production. If we talk, however, about the harmonization methodologies to calculate these carbon footprints for hydrogen. The actual threshold is as important, because in the end, different countries might decide to set different standard thresholds for hydrogen, depending on their local circumstances, depending on their development objectives. But the methodology to calculate these or define these standards and thresholds will be important. So there's really the need to harmonize the methodology for calculating the carbon footprint of hydrogen, and avoid situation that we end up with different hydrogen standards being defined in different parts of the world, which are not compatible to each other. So therefore, this discussion about harmonization that we have today and finding ways how one can develop systems approaches where different methodologies can be comparable to each other is quite important. And there are aspects where one can try to find approaches to develop compatible methodologies for calculating the carbon footprint of hydrogen. For example, one approach is to look more at a modular approach along the supply chain of hydrogen to, for example, separate a certification of the production and transport of hydrogen, so that where some countries can decide to start already certifying the entire supply chain, so including production and transport of hydrogen. Other countries might decide to start just with the production of hydrogen. Similarly, the modular approach can also be beneficial if one wants to look at other aspects of the hydrogen supply chain. For example, if we look towards synthetic hydrocarbon fuels for certification of CO2, but also if we look at other sustainability criteria, for example, water use was mentioned earlier today already. This could also be certified separately, and then with this modular approach, one can then put together to calculate the overall footprint of hydrogen. Still, there are some elements in the methodology to calculate the carbon footprint or environmental impact of hydrogen, where harmonization or common harmonization is necessary. So that, for example, we talk about the definition of renewable electricity, how fossil upstream emissions are being traded, what is the chain of custody for hydrogen or for certification schemes. So there, harmonization is needed, and there, of course, international collaboration, such as through the IPHE, as was mentioned earlier today, can help in harmonization and also avoiding the situation that countries are developing individual schemes, certification schemes, which are in the end are not compatible to each other, but also taking the opportunity by working together to avoid duplication of work in defining and developing hydrogen certification schemes and standards. So there is often, of course, international collaboration is often taking more time, taking more effort, taking longer. But in the end, there are clearly benefits if we look at the long-term needs in decarbonization of our energy system, that there's really the opportunity with international cooperation to develop systems that can talk to each other in the end. So I guess I stop here and very much looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Uwe. And I would now like to ask Barbara Yings from the IRENA. You are, like IEA, involved in many international discussions and initiatives. And maybe since you're approaching things from a particular renewable energies perspective, maybe you could add a bit additional dimensions also, which have been mentioned, which may go beyond the greenhouse gas accounting. But Barbara, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Heino. And it's been a pleasure to co-host this event with the PTX Hub. And we look forward to collaborating on an ongoing basis. Yeah, it's a perfect segue really to Uwe, what you were talking about, the collaboration, because we see that a lot of the technology and knowledge for hydrogen, renewable hydrogen and clean hydrogen is existing, but there's so much that's new and we need to collaborate and learn from each other. And it's not just technology and the carbon accounting, it's also the software, the crucial issues of public-private interaction, skills, trade, financing in the right place. Prioritizing the end use of hydrogen is a huge issue. And we find that IRENA has 184 members and members in accession. And we, a few years ago, realized that more dialogue was needed on a wider base. So we created a series of collaborative frameworks. And we have collaborative frameworks in, as you can see on the screen here, collaborative frameworks on green hydrogen is the main one that we're talking about today, but also we have collaborative framework on geopolitics, hydropower, increasing renewable energy, and offshore wind, and a few other. And we bring together public and private. And the topics are very much the topics that have been talked about already by the previous speakers, but also those other topics about critical materials, how to assist countries be more independent with their development of all parts of the supply chain for green hydrogen, how to, on a global scale, how do we avoid the risk of carbon leakage and the impact of the CBAM, for example. How do we assist countries understand how they can extend the life of their assets and minimize stranded assets? So it's a crucial part of what we do. We do deep dives into technical cost analysis, and we also facilitate a lot of dialogue. So I thought I would just focus on that. Part of our collaboration is to raise ambition, exactly what Amandeep said earlier. It's about raising the ambition, and it's about the wider picture, the bigger picture of technical, economic, social, geopolitical issues. And you can see also from the chart here shown that we're also engaged in an alarmingly fast rising number of initiatives around the world. These are the initiatives, as mentioned by Laurent, they're on clean and green hydrogen, but they're generally mixed. There's no clean only, it always includes green. And we're involved with all of them. And there's 21 at the moment. The IRENA Coalition for Action in the top middle column should be in purple as well. That's one of our initiatives as well, looking at financing projects. So it's interesting that the latest initiative on the bottom right, the Glasgow Breakthroughs, is really an initiative of initiatives, because it looks at what are all the initiatives doing and are there gaps and how do we fill those gaps. So it's a very well developed space, and collaboration is just the key word for the success of a new green hydrogen industry, market, trade, cheap production, demand by end users, and meeting the gap. At the moment, there's a mismatch between supply and demand. We see from our geopolitics report that was issued in January, and that dialogue between all the parties and public and private aims to close those gaps in understanding. So I'll leave it there because I think you'll ask a couple of questions if we've got time, but thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Barbara, for providing this picture of all the initiatives, but emphasizing and strengthening the importance of dialogue also going beyond the technical experts. But I want to come back to a technical expert, Laurent Anthony. You have already given us an idea of what IPHE has been doing. Could you maybe elaborate a bit more on what the focus of your work so far has been? You mentioned that you are extending it to the aspects of transport and others. Maybe if you could give a few more insights in where you are heading.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, with great pleasure. Just yes, then I will give some focus on this specific task force on hydrogen production analysis. This task force has been set up in October 2019, and so starting early 2020. And more or less all countries are participating in IPHE. And so we have different approach. The main approach was the following. As mentioned at the beginning, market transparency is key. If we need to give trust to all the hydrogen consumers that when using these clean, low carbon and renewable hydrogen, they are contributing to fighting the climate change and to improve the air quality. And from that point of view, certification, guarantees of origin are really key players in order to give that trust. And as just mentioned, international collaboration is key, that we need to put in place this kind of certifications, guarantees of origin that may allow also the international trade. But even if we can speak about certification, about guarantees of origin, but the first step in order to establish that, and has been mentioned by some of us previously, is to agree on a common methodology for the greenhouse gas emissions determination. And that's easily said, but much more complicated to put in place. Because as you can see here, there are many questions to be answered. And first, to agree on the product system boundary. Are we speaking from well to tank, well to wheel, well to gate, or cradle to gate, cradle to grave? So there are lots of questions that you have to agree on when you are considering any goods, but in particular hydrogen. But then also, and this is quite specific, I would say first, I would say this has been more or less already set up using this an ISO standard, the 14067 regarding carbon footprints. But there are some specific questions regarding hydrogen to be solved, which the main one is about carbon allocation rules. As you know, we can produce hydrogen from many different pathways, and hydrogen usually is a co-product or byproduct. And this means that you have several products. And so what is the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that you will allocate to hydrogen, and the other amount that we allocate to the other products or co-products? And considering a pathway using electricity, then also how can we agree on the emission factors for electricity? If it is renewable or non-renewable, and so what are we considering residual mix or not, and how? This is some questions. And one main question is also regarding renewable electricity. So far, usually it is as a hypothesis accepted that when considering renewable electricity, the greenhouse gas emissions is 0. But this is only a convention. That's not the reality. So here there is some limitations, I would say, that we need to improve in the future. Cutoff values, we cannot measure everything, but also how do we report these values, these emissions? And another key question, and this is even one of the most difficult ones to answer, is when you have CCU, so carbon capture and utilization. If it's sequestration, it's a removal. If you have long-term and underground CO2 sequestration, you can agree that it is a removal of CO2. But what about CCU? Once you will revalorize your CO2, who will have the responsibility of that CO2? Is it the original producer, or will it be the new owner? So these kind of questions have to be solved. And if you're discussing that at the international level, you can imagine that the consensus is not the most easy thing to reach. And this is something we try to do at IPHE in this specific task force, where we try to have a full value chain approach, but separated in different chapters. In order, as mentioned previously, that depending on the country, what the different countries want to do and how fast they want to go and how far. So we have separated that into a first chapter regarding greenhouse gas emissions when considering hydrogen production. The second one regarding hydrogen conditioning. This means that once you have produced your hydrogen, usually if we want to export, you have to transport it over long distances. And to do that, usually you are liquefying your hydrogen, either by cryogenic hydrogen or in the form of ammonia or liquid hydrogen hydrogen carriers. And once you have done that conditioning, then you will start to transport. And this is the third chapter, then considering when from charging up to delivering, what are the emissions corresponding to that part. And for instance, regarding in Europe, renewable fuels of non-bioenergetical origin certification, you need to include this transport aspect. So whereas for guarantees of origin, that's usually you are just giving the origin of the hydrogen you are using. So you see there, so we propose to separate that in 3 chapters. The first one of production chapter has been a first version has been realized and released end of last year. And you see here for the previous Hydrogen Energy Ministerial Day. And here we were considering different hydrogen production pathways. The first one is using electrolysis. The second one, steam methane reforming. Then hydrogen as a byproduct, for instance, for chloralkali processes. And the fourth one was considering coal gasification with CCS. And now we have just finalized over the last months a new one, which is hydrogen production from biomass. And we're working on the autothermal reforming, steam reforming, so ATR. And so this here we agreed to have, I would say, a well-to-gate approach, which is more or less what has already been accepted for other energy vectors like electricity. So, and regarding allocation, as mentioned, quite a question, we agreed also to favor as much as possible energy allocation, which means that as much as physical values can be used, we have to do that. But if not, then we may go to this substitution processes, or finally on economical value allocation. And regarding conditioning of hydrogen carriers, we are almost done also. We have finalized the cryogenic hydrogen, ammonia, and now we are on the way to finalize different couples of liquid hydrogen carriers. And regarding transport chapter, here we are considering transporting hydrogen either through pipes, but also then using shipping, trains, or trucks in the different forms, either using these carriers or compressed hydrogen. And so you see this is almost now ongoing, but normally we plan to release the second version of the paper with the new items I've just mentioned previously early this summer or during the summer. And then also having in mind that by fall this year, we may also have then the transport chapter as the first drop. And this document, the aim of this document is really to contribute to the international discussion, to provide the comments. And that's why we had quite a lot of meetings with ARENA, with IEA, but also with the Hydrogen Council, with the World Energy Council also. And the idea is really to have these exchanges and to finalize and to come to an agreement. And the next step, which has just started, is to start a new working group under the ISO. ISO TC197 Hydrogen Technologies in collaboration with ISO 207. They are the technical committee developing all the ISO 14,000 standards. So that's to move from that guideline from IPHE to an ISO standard, then with the contribution of all the different stakeholders coming from public, but also from industry. So this is more or less where we are. And from now, as mentioned, we are taking the same assumptions as, for instance, for renewable electricity, but we are really looking forward to having the full picture, which is only also to include the capex emissions, as we say, but not only for hydrogen, it has to be included also for electricity and for gas. But that might be then in the second step. So that's what I can tell you about this IPHE task force.
Thank you, Laurent. And I think it's getting clearer and clearer how complex things are. And I'm afraid we may even make it more complex. And maybe that's the background why, if I'm correct, the report by the German chapter of the World Energy Council was rather skeptical. It was about global harmonization of hydrogen certification, the opportunities and barriers. So Mayra Kusch, are you with us?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Good afternoon or good morning.
Briefly explain to us what the outcome of your study has been and what would be your message.
Yes, I will. Thank you also for the kind introduction.
Sorry. Before you start, I had a look at the questions and answers, and it seems that I've frustrated you with the very limited uptake on the first panel discussion. So I would really encourage you to put your questions in again, and it looks as if we will have more time now to discuss in detail. So please, if you have remaining questions, put them in the Q&A. Sorry, Myra, and over to you.
No problem, thank you. And also for the kind introduction in the beginning. Yes, my name is Myra Kusch. I'm head of office at World Energy Council Germany. And just briefly, for those of you who don't know us yet, we are the German chapter, as Heino just said, of the World Energy Council, which is the largest international energy network based in London with over 90 member committees all over the world. And we try to give a global perspective into the national debate in Germany. Just to give some background, and as Heino also mentioned, together with the German Energy Agency, DENA, we released a report in January on the global harmonization of hydrogen certification, which I would like to briefly present today. I hope you can see my slide. What we saw was that there's already a wide variety of hydrogen standards globally, and these vary in terms of the requirements for hydrogen production, which means, for example, if you get the produced renewable hydrogen certified according to the requirements of a certain market A, then you cannot just or simply put them on a market B unless you get the volume certified again according to the existing legislation in the market B. Which means in the end less flexibility for the producers to address different international markets. And therefore we asked ourselves, would it be possible to harmonize the different standards that have already developed and that are already developing still, in order to maybe enable a global certification system for renewable hydrogen? And as part of our paper, we looked at 11 standards and regulatory frameworks for renewable hydrogen all over the world. For example, ICC Plus, Certify, the China Hydrogen Alliance standard, the Australian Zero Carbon Certification Scheme, also the German funding program H2 Global, and the RED II, the EU Renewable Energy Directive. And then in our report, we assessed similarities and differences, and also the potential for harmonization. For example, we compared the certification governance and also, of course, sustainability criteria regarding the hydrogen production. For example, we had a look at the greenhouse gas emissions requirements and also eligible carbon sources. And just to give you very briefly the results that we found, our analysis showed that the most harmonized sustainability requirements are the use of renewable electricity inputs, mass balancing as a tracking model, as well as the eligibility of all carbon sources, as long as they are not deliberately produced for the hydrogen generation. However, in the end, we came to the conclusion that a uniform certification system will be very difficult to implement, at least at the moment, which is mainly due to the fact that countries or markets with particularly ambitious criteria for the production of renewable hydrogen, such as a renewable electricity criteria according to RED II in the EU, will very unlikely abandon those ambitious criteria in favor of the globally harmonized system. And that's why we presented the idea of a plan concept, which you can see in the next slide. If it moves, yeah, no. So this plant concept is basically based on a direct connection between the electrolyzer and the renewable power plant, a 70% greenhouse gas reduction of the produced hydrogen compared to reference value of 94 gram CO2 equivalents per megajoule, and the use of atmospheric carbon via direct air capture. And in addition, the chain of custody must be traced by mass balancing, which is a tracking model where the physical delivery of an energy carrier goes hand in hand with a certificate. And by fulfilling these criteria shown in the slide, hydrogen producers would comply with all regulations and standards which we assessed in our paper, and therefore could gain access to the market, which is of course important when you want to sell your green hydrogen. However, because these requirements in the plan concept are very ambitious, this plan concept is also linked to relatively high costs, especially due to the direct connection between the electrolyzer and the power plant. And therefore, in our report, we also proposed alternative plan concepts, because for a larger part of the assessed markets, leaner plan concepts would also satisfy the existing criteria. For instance, in China, Japan, and in California, also the use of electricity from the grid is allowed. So that is, you could also sell the hydrogen on the existing market or get it certified on the existing market with less ambitious criteria as shown in this plan concept. With regard to the time, I will stop here. Just for your information, the study is available on our website, and I'm very happy to share the link in the chat or in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Myra. I think we now have quite a complete picture of the issues. And I don't know if there are among the panelists also comments on the other presentations. I don't know. Then maybe I would like to stay for a first round with the panelists. Barbara, you have any comments or observations on what you've heard from your co-panelists? Otherwise, I would bring in questions from the Q&A.
Well, only to add that I think Myra's points show the complexity and the work that we've got to do, and that there needs to be the ambition and the collaboration for this to work. What we see at the moment is the first grey hydrogen being shipped from Australia to Japan. It's an agreement, a sales agreement between two entities, and that's what we're trying to get away from. We want to have trade rules and purchasing agreements that are global in nature, and I think the WEC report has shown how complex that is. And Lauren and Uwe, I just agree with their points, with their main focus, but I won't take up too much time. I forgot to add before that we're actually very pleased that Canada is very involved in the dialogue that IRENA runs and the collaborative frameworks. So thanks to Canada for being part of it. And of course, they are world leaders in hydrogen production at the moment, and with developing the resources, but there's so much else to learn through these collaborative frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara, your slide showed the multitude of initiatives. So Uwe Remmer, how do you see us moving forward? Because there obviously is a risk that we end up in a patchwork of different initiatives. Do you see any momentum to move towards a consolidation of these various initiatives? I mean, the IEA is hosting the Clean Energy Ministerial. IRENA is involved in that too. IPHE is closely working with that. Do you think this would be a kind of nucleus around which one could try to catalyze, is the big word, all those different initiatives?
Yeah, I guess it's a very interesting question. I guess Barbara's slide, provided an excellent overview on the different initiatives that already exist today. And definitely, I guess there shouldn't be, let's say, the intention to create new initiatives or frameworks. I guess we have really a very good, or at least a large number of initiatives already existing today. So I guess it's more the questions how one can better organize, who is doing what, which initiative is responsible for which aspect of the discussions related to aspects related to hydrogen. So I guess in my view, it's a bit more trying to find ways to identify which initiative is focusing which aspect of this hydrogen topic. I mean, the questions and challenges we're facing is large enough. So we need these initiatives and we need a lot of input, a lot of expertise from different countries around the world to address these questions. It's better how one can, within the existing framework initiatives we have, getting potentially better organized and avoid duplication of work. I mean, that's the apparent risk that there is if we have too many of these initiatives doing the same thing, then it's of course not very efficient.
Maybe Laurent, you would like to comment on that, and I would then also have a follow-up question. But maybe it seems you had wanted to intervene.
Yes, because I would say, as mentioned by Uwe and Barbara, yes, it's important to coordinate. But this is already in place. Since several months, there are monthly meetings between the main, at least one representative of the main initiatives to share different information, what they are doing, what they plan to do. And so to create that exchange between all the initiatives and try to avoid redundancy. So of course you may have some overlap, but the idea is not to do twice exactly the same thing. So fortunately, it's already in place. And also, as mentioned previously by Barbara, this Glasgow Breakthrough Initiative also may contribute to try to coordinate all the different initiatives working in a better way together.
Now I have from the list of Q&As also a critical question. I mean, you are at IPHE trying to develop a scheme, but already you get critical comments, new reports coming up saying that you probably underestimate the relevance of, in particular, probably methane leakage and other elements. To what extent are you already in the phase of updating what you have done before developing further schemes?
So first, I would like to thank all of these giving these criticisms. That's exactly what we have released that paper, is to have also some feedback and some comments. So regarding we are underestimating, I'm afraid I won't agree with that. And if we, in particular with methane leakages, this is already taken into account, because as we mentioned, we are working from well to gate approach, and well to gate means that you have to provide all your emissions also from, I would say, the primary energy and the primary fuel you are using. So this means when you are considering in particular steam methane reforming, so natural gas, you have to take into account all the emissions from the extraction of your natural gas up to arriving to your plant. So that means that all the leakages have to be taken into account already. But where we are underestimating, and this was already mentioning before, but that's the case more or less for all the energies that we are calculating the greenhouse gas today. We are not taking into consideration all what the so-called gray energies. So which means all the capex when you are building your plant, you are building your electrolyzer, your SMR plant, we are not taking that into account. Or when we are considering zero emission for renewable electricity, here we are really underestimating greenhouse gas emissions. As you know that just by facts from the IPCC numbers, when electricity produced by PV, by photovoltaics, emits 3 to 4 times more greenhouse gases than when you produce the same amount of electricity by windmills or by nuclear electricity. But as a convention, we say renewable means zero. And this is true for electricity. So that's why also at IPHE, we have decided to use the same assumption, because it would be unfair to say, yes, for hydrogen, we have to consider everything, but not for electricity, not for gas. So that's why we are just asking that this has to be changed in the future, that all energy calculations have to have this full LCA approach. Because the idea is really at the beginning, what do we want? Do we really want to find a climate change? Then we have really to be transparent and to take into account all the emissions and not only part of them.
Yeah.
And as mentioned, well, we welcome all the comments, and this will help us to improve the document.
Yeah. And clearly, I mean, so far we are only discussing the greenhouse gas accounting, whereas clearly once we have a broader approach to sustainable hydrogen and PTX products more broadly, then the issue comes in, whereas does the water come from? Because where you have wind and sun, you probably have water stress. Yes, it may be possible to solve this with desalination and others, but you have to address it. Same for land use, and not talking about the economic and social dimensions, conditions of labor and human rights, etc. Because you just mentioned photovoltaic. Once we go really back in the chain, we have to address all those topics. Therefore, Mayra, we cannot open all those boxes, but if I'm correct, then the World Energy Council clearly also comes with a strong vision from the industry and business sector. Do you have the feeling that the business and industry perspectives are sufficiently taken into account? And whom do you see as the main drivers of this debate about certification? Is it governments, or isn't there an interest by industries and maybe even business initiatives to advance standards and certification schemes?
I think they are both levels. Of course, from industry, we see huge demand and a huge interest in having standards. You know, that's what we, that's actually what our members tell us all the time. We need a certification scheme now. We want to put the hydrogen on the market, but we need standards for that. We need regulation. That is what we hear from the industry. I think this question really has two levels, though, because then there's one business, or the one process of the initiatives driven by business, and then there's, of course, the political level. You know, with regulations like RED II, where specific requirements are already stated, where also, where there are financial aids also given, you know, very lucrative financial aids that, of course, push for the development of green hydrogen. So I think it's really a two-level process with sometimes differing interests, of course. But I think in general, both the political level and both the industry and business level are pushing for standards very quickly. You know, we need a regulation and some sort of also technical standards. We've been talking about certification, but of course the whole hydrogen market encompasses so much more. We're talking about safety standards. There are so many things really to consider. How is the hydrogen transported in the end? What will it cost? So there are very many different things to consider here. I've just talked about certification, but I really see a very strong urge on all levels for at least some sort of technical safety certification standards, you know, just as a common denominator.
Thank you. Barbara, you have stressed the importance of dialogue. What kind of dialogue is this you are envisaging? Is it government to government, international organizations, or to what extent are you bringing other stakeholders and maybe not only business, but also others on board? Do you have the impression that, for example, civil society organizations are sufficiently involved in the debate? Or are we risking, by not involving them, that we run into blockages which could be avoided?
Well, I mean, it's always a very interesting topic. If you listen to everyone and try and keep everyone happy, you'll never develop. You know, you'll never keep everyone happy. We really know what the priorities for green hydrogen are, based on science, based on industry, and based on the needs for decarbonization. And our dialogue is as wide as possible. Our collaborative frameworks involve our members and think tanks and researchers and consultants and project developers, the whole range. And most of our meetings in general in IRENA are open to the public, such as this one. Some are closed, of course, as they have to be with members. Our reports are all issued, everything we produce is issued on the website, publicly available. So we try and cast our wet net as widely as possible, but within the arena that is effective for what we're trying to achieve. We definitely listen to everyone's opinion, from civil society, from lobby groups, but our dialogue is really with people that can make a difference. Our members are the policymakers, and our closest dialogue is with policymakers, because our aim is to develop policy that will allow the uptake of renewable energy, part of which, of course, is hydrogen, and to prioritize that energy in the right places. And then, of course, all the other issues that we've talked about in this dialogue. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I would like to move over to the IAA, to Uwe, and maybe also Laurent. IAA, international organization, less members than IRENA. Do you see these international organizations really as the right place to establish the regulatory frameworks and certification schemes? Or, Laurent, if I understand you correctly, you are rather looking at next steps in the ISO world. So does this exclude each other, or what are the next steps to really bring together Canadian and European thoughts and initiatives to the next level? And maybe if I can ask, if he is still in the room, Johannes, to come back and maybe also get involved in this debate. Uwe, first reaction, and then maybe Laurent.
Yes, thank you very much for this very interesting, very important question. I guess it's one needs, in a way, of course, both fora to discuss these aspects. I mean, more on the policy level, one needs also stakeholder support from policymakers in the different countries. One needs agreements between countries on how one can define standards, certification schemes for hydrogen, and then having these more technical committees like ISO can, of course, then help really to sort out many of the technical details that are relevant, important, taken into account, have to be taken into account. So I guess we need kind of both levels in terms of communication between countries, one more at the policy level, involving, of course, also expertise that is then brought from organizations like ISO to provide that these standards are also solid in the end that we are discussing or proposing.
Thank you. Laurent, you have?
Yes, I would agree with Uwe. Yes, I think I agree with Uwe. I think we have to have in mind that energy policies is a responsibility of governments. So that's why if you want to put in place some regulations, some laws, it's up to the governments to do that. And that's why these government-to-government initiatives are so important, in order to have these exchanges and then to try to find a consensus on what has to be set in the different countries, but it's up to them. And that's why, for instance, what at IPHE we are doing, IPHE members are not liable to apply what the IPHE documents. They may, but it's up to the government responsibility to say, I will take all the documents or part of it, or not at all. That's really the responsibility of each government. And nobody can play the rule of the responsibility of the governments. But we need to have these exchanges, to work together, to have the best practices. And even there are new countries applying, for instance, to join IPHE because they want to develop hydrogen. And they see it could be quicker and much more relevant if I can have this kind of discussions with already countries developing hydrogen policies and regulations. And another point is we need also to distinguish certifications, guarantees of origin, and methodology for calculating carbon footprint. That's totally different. And that's why if sometimes you have some documents claiming that we are doing both of them in the same document, you are just mixing things which are totally different. It's one thing to agree on a methodology, and this can be done under standardization like ISO, but we cannot put in place standard certifications which are more the responsibility of public authorities. And this cannot be done in a certification body. So that's why we do not have to mix these things. And so that's why also I agree with Uwe, it is complementary. And finally, of course, governments are putting in place laws, but when we are putting some regulations and also agreeing on some methodologies, for both of them, it's important that industry, which will use them and apply them, has also been consulted in order to ensure that what is put in place is implementable. Because that's, for instance, why we have this discussion, for instance, with the Hydrogen Council. We may develop a standardization of greenhouse gas emissions, but if industry cannot apply it because it's too complicated, nobody will apply it. So, this under the ISO is really between all the stakeholders, also including industry. So that's why I think it's really complementary between governments and private stakeholders, and between standards and certification.
Thank you. I'm wondering if Johannes Bauer is still with us, and if yes, I would be interested to hear from him, because we have that in the chat. The question: how would you handle the additionality of hydropower from, for example, Quebec, where you have overcapacities? Would that, and it would not be additional renewable, so how would the EU scheme deal with that? But it seems he is no longer with us, so maybe somebody else can volunteer, but I see that Barbara has raised her hand, so I'll pass on to Barbara.
I just wanted to follow on from what Laurent said, that indeed it goes in hand, and as I had said, the policy, we focus, obviously our members are the policymakers, but I just wanted to add that you know, we're told by private industry if we're not moving fast enough as well. You know, they have to be in the dialogue, such as our Coalition for Action is definitely creating projects with private companies, but also you'll see the rise of the GH2, the Green Hydrogen Organization, that's doing a great job in drafting a green hydrogen standard, mainly because they said that the other initiatives are too slow. So it's essential to have public and private working together, because sometimes they tell us when we're too slow, and sometimes they can act faster in giving advice, obviously not in making policy, but influencing the debate. Thanks.
Thank you. And Laurent wants
Yes.
to answer immediately. If you allow
just
me,
very quickly, just to tell this about this green hydrogen initiative standard. Here they are proposing values, threshold values. And here I think we need to be very careful, because this is not the responsibility of any initiative. This has to be given by laws, by regulations. So I'm not sure, because I'm not, who will oblige any country to apply these values?
Yeah.
That's we
They're
have to be
very
careful.
aware of that, and also I think it's more of a best practice at the moment. It's not really a standard yet. It's a good initiative, but yeah, definition. Thanks.
but coming back to thresholds, Laurent, you have developed a methodology, and you have not yet put thresholds. Is that right?
Yes, and we will not.
And once once thresholds are set, and that would be something I would have liked to also ask the Commission, what is the phasing in process? Because I mean, there are lots of countries with great potential in the global south who now hope to being able to export to Europe or to the north, but they may not be able to quickly respond to all the threshold values and conditions. So how important do you think, maybe Uwe and Laurent, how important do you think will be phasing in mechanisms? And if there is anybody from the Commission who could answer how flexible the EU will be to deal with that, because I think the message we got was things will apply to internal and external in an equal manner.
I may just say that regarding thresholds, that's very sensitive. As mentioned, it will be the responsibility of the different countries. The European Union, the European Commission is proposing a value, but in fact, even we have today two values. If you are considering the act of RED II, if you consider then a decrease of 70%, then you go to a threshold value of 3.3, around 3.3 kilograms CO2 equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen. But if you refer to the green taxonomy, it's a value of 3. So you see that, and so if your project is in between 3 and 3.3, you are not considered green from the taxonomy point of view, but renewable from the delegated act point of view. So you see, even at the European level, we need to have a common value. If you consider China, they say it's low carbon hydrogen if it's below 14 kilograms, which is more than using gray, that is the gray hydrogen. In US, there are, I think, a value of 2. So I think that these different values will, as you mentioned, create difficulties in order to facilitate an international trade. So the idea, that's why we need to work step by step. First, to agree how we calculate what is the system boundary, and then to try to come to a convergence of the threshold values. But I'm not sure this will happen in 6 months. And another hard question is, as we are speaking about importation, we need also to have the same rules for the hydrogen produced in a country as for the hydrogen imported in that country. This means that we have to take into account the emissions associated to transport from the production point to the consumption point. And here also, it might not be a consensus if you are more an exporter country or an importer country. So you see, there are lots of discussions.
We're getting into the nitty-gritty of 3 compared to 3.3. Maybe a step back, Uwe. How do you see this issue of phasing in thresholds, and are we not losing time? You had mentioned in the beginning the general political and energy policy context we are in. Will this not take far too long in order to get properly started?
I mean, I would say that to get properly started, really taking one step after the other. So I guess we really have to, what we discussed today, to talk about the framework or the methodologies to calculate the carbon footprint or generally environmental footprint of hydrogen. And I guess the next step is really then, and of course, methodology, as also Laurent said, of course, something that is being discussed, being developed, of course, involving countries, but also involving experts. And the next step is, in my view, how we can then ensure that the decarbonization of hydrogen is happening as fast as required if we want to reach net zero globally or for different countries. I mean, each country starts from different conditions today. I mean, it might be that China because they have a lot of production of hydrogen from coal. For that reason, have decided to define low carbon hydrogen at least 14.5 kilograms CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen. So there might be, of course, reasons, and there can be for domestic reasons that can be justified from their perspective. And I guess for that reason, we see different countries starting from different starting points. And I guess if these countries are moving towards reaching net zero goals, I guess there's really implicitly harmonization needs to happen, that we because otherwise we won't reach net zero globally in the end.
Thank you. Maybe a last question to Mayra and Barbara. Do you see a risk that by developing now very ambitious sustainability standards for renewable hydrogen, we are actually raising barriers, whereas other types of hydrogen can still go on without checking on too many environmental and other sustainability dimensions? Do you see that risk, and would we therefore need also some more focus on the non-renewable supply chains for hydrogen and derivatives?
Maybe I can start with the general comment, because what we found in the end in our study was also that, of course, hydrogen schemes or certification schemes for hydrogen should not be too strict, as they can hinder the market ramp up of hydrogen, and specifically renewable hydrogen, which we had a look at. So yes, I agree. If the criteria are too strict, they can be a barrier. Not necessarily and not always, because often what we found was with ambitious criteria, there are often also ambitious incentive schemes, which can also help the ramp up. So it's not a black and white. That is also, I think, an important point to consider, that because, of course, the Renewable Energy Directive and the EU or the planned EU certification scheme may set very high criteria, very high ambitions, but of course, it's backed up by incentives. So you really have to weigh. You really have to have a differentiated view. Also with regard to the bankability of renewable hydrogen projects and green hydrogen in comparison to non-green hydrogen, I think we also see a sort of change ever since the 24th of February, at least in Europe. I think everything is pretty much changing at the moment, because renewable hydrogen is actually becoming affordable, also with regard or in comparison to fossil-based hydrogen. I think that's also a very important development to consider. So maybe the rules, or what we considered the rules before the 24th of February, are just changing. And so the whole landscape for the market ramp up of hydrogen also seems to be changing to some extent. Of course, we have to consider that these are very developments that have happened after the Ukraine crisis. Of course, this might change again, but this is a development we're seeing right now. So it's really not that black and white view. I think that's what I would like to stress in the end.
Thank you very much. Barbara, you have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, easy. I support what you say, Mayra. Absolutely support that. I think what we do at IRENA, we show that it's the best choice. You just show that it's the best choice, and the rest should follow. Cost reduction. I mean, even before the invasion of Ukraine, the cost was getting prohibitive for gas because of the storage issues and the increase of demand in the east, in Asia. But so already the business case was looking better, and it is looking even more attractive now. A key thing is to not depend on subsidies, is to be self-sufficient, to have such a good business case that it's standalone and you're not dependent on subsidies. That is an ideal case. Also, if policymakers set targets for green hydrogen, because of all to meet the climate change targets, to meet the Paris targets, to reduce emissions, because the whole of supply chain is taken into account, like IPHE is showing, and with the methane emissions upstream, then again, it just is the best choice for emissions reductions. Also the geopolitics, getting away from the dependence on fossil fuels. It's a good choice, more energy independence. Jobs, the socio-economic issues, it's all part and parcel with, green hydrogen being developed from renewables and not from fossils. It's got all those other benefits. So it's really about showing where it's the best choice, and it has to be the best choice. And we know all those issues that I mentioned, we have to reduce the cost and get more demand from the end users, and then it should all fall into place because it's just better than the alternatives.
Well, thank you very much. With this, I'm afraid we will have to close also the second panel. I would like to thank all the participants, also from the first panel. Thank you very much. We did not expect to cover all the topics in a conclusive manner. It was the first dialogue in a new series. And as I said in the beginning, this is a process that feeds into the long-standing EU-Canada high-level energy dialogue. And maybe I could now in the end ask the two representatives of the European Union and of Canada, not really as it's in the program, to summarize the main outcomes and recommendations, but maybe give us a few hints to what you think might be useful feedback to the high-level dialogue. And there is a plan to move further in our debate here at the end of May or maybe early June. And I think the discussions have shown that there is plenty of scope for diving deeper into some of the specifics that were raised here. May I ask Tudor Constantinescu to share his conclusions with us? And then I think since Paula and Aaron have left us, it is probably for Mr. Garcha to give us the Canadian view. Is Tudor still with us? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Heino. Thank you very much. Very interesting discussion. Very pleased to be with you until the end and want to intervene. I would like just to say a little bit, maybe to go towards kind of concluding. We see the diversity of points of view, the diversity of approaches. What is important is indeed to agree, and this is what we have tried also with IPAG and with Laurent to have a methodology, at least to understand each other, but to accept that at a certain moment maybe also some differences. But essentially in all this is that, and one has to understand these national circumstances and also regional ones. For Europe, it's really important when we speak about renewable hydrogen to guarantee that it's renewable hydrogen and to follow the principles also in the system integration. So the direct use of electricity where it makes most sense to direct use electricity. And then if it is to use for hydrogen production renewables, not to do it in a way that otherwise would generate more emissions to produce electricity. It is a difficult balancing exercise, and we acknowledge, and you'll see in the proposal from the Commission, we try to reach a balance. We try to offer a larger possibility for a phasing period and for a transition period. We are aware of this, and on the other hand, we are also aware that moving, and especially now with the Repower EU, with the new targets, let's face it, we're already thinking for with Fit for 55, we're proposing to have almost 40% renewables by 2030. If you translate this in electricity in power generation, renewables is 65%. Now we need to move to over 70%. So gradually the fear of this additionality will be taken over. So it will not be something which really to put a button. But we have to make sure that things happen properly. And to happen properly, why? Because, and I think this is maybe, instead of conclusion, one of the main elements I want to underline, hydrogen and renewable hydrogen has a capacity to make renewables a global commodity. So far, we didn't have this, so we couldn't trade renewables across continents. Now, due to hydrogen, this is the biggest opportunity, and I think this is the angle to handle it. And this is the angle to look also at developing this dialogue with Canada. And I'm not stuck on a figure. Maybe some say that some of the plans in Canada are too ambitious. Maybe some say some of the plans in Europe are too ambitious. But let's work together on these ambition plans and do the best out of it, and develop a common understanding, work together on methodologies, work together on maybe a study to see how to develop the supply chain together, develop some demonstration together, work on the ports together, make this happening. And then more ambitious we are, more chances we have to translate this in some concrete projects, which to lead us to decarbonization on one hand, and to a more modern economy. We need to repower our economy to have a new energy system. The infrastructure in Europe is aging. We need this modernization. In any case, technologies bring us new possibilities. Let's use the momentum. Let's step up on this, and also let's make the best for the climate in this way. So this would be for the first workshop, and thank you very much for the discussion. Very interesting and very good start for the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And maybe now a Canadian perspective.
Yes, thank you, Heino, and thank you.
You're still with us. Please.
Yes, thank you, Tudor, and thank you, Heino. And I agree with Tudor 100%. You know, we have to be ambitious if we're going to address the challenges of not only today, but of meeting our net zero targets for the future. Now, Canada is an active participant in the IPHE and supports their guidance in developing the appropriate frameworks to establish a vibrant hydrogen market without being overly duplicative. Now, one of the key recommendations that came out of the Trade Rules Task Force paper is the need for bilateral and multilateral agreements for hydrogen trade. You know, globally, these will be more effective than incorporating within the current WTO framework. And when keeping this in mind, the recommendation out of the report flows very well with the reason why we're here today. The global energy transition and the current geopolitical tensions in Eastern Europe will influence our ability to successfully support the EU's energy security objectives. And let's not forget, energy security is often described by the diversity of energy resources available in a transitionary nature. So although the focus of today's discussion has been largely around electrolytic hydrogen, we cannot lose sight of the overall energy transition. This transition that we speak of will take over 25 years. And current discussions on displacing Russian natural gas in Europe is part of the transition, as is the uptake of hydrogen and its derivatives. For Canada, hydrogen produced via carbon abatement, or blue, is part of the transition, and as such should be considered if we want to address the issues of transition over the long run and energy security issues of today. Hence why we don't like to use colors. They do not accurately describe the carbon content of hydrogen. Canada judges its hydrogen not by the color of this colorless molecule, but by the intensity of its carbon. So to augment this point, we have to keep in mind affordability while driving down emissions. And that's key for Canada, and I'm certain that's at the top of mind of my European counterparts as well. Now, provinces are building additional renewable capacity. We see this happening in Quebec and the Maritime provinces, as well as Atlantic, and that's a key priority as part of their provincial renewable energy priorities. However, our electricity objectives are very different from the challenges being faced by Europe. Hence, alignment and recognition of Canada's existing renewable power without bringing into the issue of additionality would help facilitate transatlantic trade. Now, regulatory alignment and certification will need to align with various production pathways in order to successfully keep in line with our net zero objectives while pivoting under the pressures of geopolitical tensions. This allows for us to take a step-by-step milestone approach, allowing for the gradual reduction of carbon in our energy systems. This approach will also provide strong linkages across Canada's energy sector with Europe's energy needs. Providing regulatory certainty for producers and consumers through various production pathways and end uses are crucial to developing a resilient hydrogen market and strong transatlantic energy trade corridor. Thank you all.
Thank you very much for these two very encouraging statements. I would also finally like to thank all those who have facilitated this exchange, both at IRENA with the technical host and also my colleagues at the PTX Hub who have been in touch with the various speakers and panelists. I think this was a good start, and it showed that it's worth continuing this kind of debate. You will receive invitations for the second meeting. Thank you all very much. Take care and see you soon in this context. Thank you very much.